a few months ago talked about the COVID crisis, the pandemic, and what was going on then. Now a few months have passed, and we just want to talk about what has changed and some updates on treatments, vaccines, what has happened around the world in different countries, and so on. There are a lot of different vaccine candidates, but there are 4 different ones that have so far advanced to phase 3. So when you're testing either vaccines or drug treatments, you have to pass them through 3 different phases of testing. Phase 1 tells you whether the treatment or the vaccine is safe at all, so it's only done in a small group of people. At phase 2, you expand it to a few hundred people, and you test the safety even more, and you get a little bit of information about efficacy and whether it's protective or helps the patients or not, but not a ton. And then if you're sure that it's safe, you go and you do phase 3 trials in a lot of people, and that's when you really find out whether the vaccine is protecting people from infection, or if you're testing a drug, whether it's helping the people who are already sick. So there are 4 candidates right now that have advanced to phase 3 that are promising in terms of maybe eventually being vaccines that are going to be on the market. So there's the collaboration between Pfizer and BioNTech, which has advanced to phase 3 trials, and they have shown that their vaccine is triggering a strong immune response. We see the same thing with the candidate from the company called Moderna. Same thing from the collaboration between Oxford University and AstraZeneca, and also from the 4th company, Sinovac, a Chinese vaccine company, which has also advanced its candidate to phase 3. All 4, like I said, have shown that you can get a strong antibody and general immune response if you give people their vaccines. But in reality, until we do the phase 3 trial where you vaccinate tens of thousands of people, we will not know how effective they are at protecting people. The interesting thing is that usually these phases take a long time, but because we're in a crisis situation, the phase 1 and 2 trials have been compacted basically into one large trial, and phase 3 trials are being done right away as soon as phase 2 trials are done and prove that the vaccines are safe. And the other important thing is just the logistics. Even if you have a phase 3 trial that shows that you have a good vaccine, you need to make literally billions of doses so that you can vaccinate a large population of everyone on Earth. So what has to be done is that even before phase 3 trials are going to be finished, governments and companies are going to have to take a financial risk and just already buy and pay for hundreds of millions, billions of doses to be made right away. And if it comes out that they're not effective, you just have to throw that away. But you need to make it ahead of time so that right away you have enough for the population of your country or your region. So that's what we have in terms of vaccines. As far as treatments, there are 2 major treatments that are being tested right now. Remdesivir from Gilead. They have finished phase 3 trials in various settings, trying it with critically ill patients, moderately ill patients, and they see that to some extent it is helping the patients. Depending on whether you look at moderately ill patients or critical ill patients, it is either shortening the period for how long they're sick, or it's reducing mortality. And same thing we see for another drug, a steroid called dexamethasone that has already been used for other diseases. It seems to be helping really sick people who are on ventilators. And it is shortening the amount of time they're on ventilators and reducing mortality. But it is not a cure. It's not saving 100% of the people who are sick, so it's not like we can be relaxed about it now because we have a treatment, because that's not the case. But generally, aside from that, also doctors are learning a lot more about how to treat these patients. In the beginning, there was a lot of mortality because this disease is a little strange. It's not like other respiratory diseases where it seems like people are experiencing oxygen shortages even if they look fine. So it took a while for doctors and hospitals to figure out how to treat these patients. And now they're a lot more experienced. It seems like mortality rates are going down just based on doctors having more experience. During this whole crisis, it's been interesting to kind of observe how different countries have been dealing with the crisis. How some have learned from their mistakes, some haven't learned from their mistakes, some have done well from the beginning, some have done well in the beginning and then relaxed too much and are doing poorly now. So a country that, for example, is a great example of how to do it and how to deal with the crisis is Taiwan. I mean, Taiwan has a lot of travel with China, so you would think that they would be one of the first hotspots. They have about 24 million people, one of the most densely populated countries in the world, and in total they've had only 500 cases. So how can that be? Well, first of all, they have a great healthcare system. They have great leadership that the people trust. That's very important, that when the leader comes out and says everyone has to wear masks, whatever, people actually trust her or him and do that. And also a culture that is maybe went through a crisis like that before, or a culture that follows recommendations of the government. So that has to do with trust again, but also the local culture. Same thing has happened in South Korea. They've had very few cases. In Japan, they had very few cases in the beginning, but now they're seeing a growth because they opened up nightclubs and other places like that. And I guess people are tired of the quarantine and the government doesn't want to upset the people. So it also requires a strong leadership at a national level that is willing to do things that is not going to make the people happy. And another thing that's also important is this concept of contact tracing, because people are going to get sick. But when they get sick, there needs to be some sort of centralized, either governmental or some sort of healthcare system that will say, okay, this person's sick, who are the people that they had spent time with, and then ask those people to quarantine themselves for a week or 2 weeks. So that requires infrastructure, and it requires that people actually follow those recommendations, which has been very hard to do in the West, it looks like. I mean, America is a really big example of how not to do it, both because we have a really bad national leadership right now that is either ignorant of what's happening or is prioritizing self-interests over the people's lives. And at the same time, a very decentralized healthcare system that has historically disadvantaged poor communities and minority communities. That's nothing new, but this crisis is really highlighting that problem. And also a culture in the West of people really prioritizing their freedoms and liberties, even at the cost of the community, or even, it seems like, at a cost to themselves, which is hard to understand, but that's just a cultural difference of how people are used to living here. I mean, even today, there were reports of big protests in Berlin because in Germany, they have been doing relatively well compared to other European countries, but they're still keeping restrictions in place, rationally, I think, to make sure that problems that are happening right now in Spain are not going to spread to Germany. But the people are tired of it, and people in the West, like in Germany or in America and the UK, are used to having their freedoms. So, they protest about it, and they want to stop those restrictions. Other examples of countries that have done poorly, other than the United States, is obviously Brazil, Russia, the United Kingdom. In all those cases, you have leadership that again is either ignorant about the problem or is prioritizing the image of the country or the image of the administration over the people's health, unfortunately. I mean, we saw that very clearly in Brazil. I mean, still we're seeing that where the leader of Brazil, Bolsonaro, is just unwilling to take the problem seriously. And we saw that in the UK as well. So just to kind of summarize, it's all a mix of having great leadership that is willing to make difficult decisions, of a culture in society of following the recommendations that are rationally set by the healthcare community and the scientific community, and a healthcare system and an infrastructure to track people who get sick and to find out who they had contact with. All of that has to come together, otherwise you're just not going to be able to control the spread of infections. So there's a lot of talk in the media and about first waves and second waves of infection. It's kind of a semantic difference, but basically it depends on where you are, what wave you're in. In the United States, we're still in the first wave because we did such a poor job of ever managing it, so it never went down. In Spain, for example, they're experiencing their second wave right now because they had a really bad situation that they got under control, and now they're seeing a new spike of infections, which they will hopefully be able to control better this time because they already went through it before. In Azerbaijan, it's still the first wave because the time period when a lot of countries were experiencing their first wave, there actually weren't that many cases in Azerbaijan. Either because, probably as a combination of the restrictions that were in place, as well as less travel than some other countries. But right now, we're seeing still the first wave that has come down, but there's still, for a relatively small country like Azerbaijan, still a significant number of infections. So as the infections are tapering off, of course, there's going to be pressure to lift the restrictions on the quarantine, as well as people are understandably just kind of tired of it. And there are certain reasons that make it understandable why people are tired of it. You know, people have to earn money, people have to feed their families, and if there's no governmental help, then of course you're going to be tired of it and you need to go out there and earn a living. That's understandable. But if people are just tired of like not going to concerts or going to, you know, weddings or things like that, that's less understandable because that's not worth the risk. So there are certain things we can do individually that are still going to help the community because some people understandably cannot quarantine for all this time, either because they need to go out and earn a living or because they have jobs that are essential. But those of us who can still stay at home as much as possible, or if you do need to go outside to spend time with your friends and family, doing it outside where the risk of spread is much less, then it's important that you do that. Because this is a sort of a rare case where individual actions, even if they're not impacting you because you're 22 years old and healthy, are really impacting everyone else. And it's hard to measure on an individual level and tell someone, like, this is what you did. This is the person that you influenced their death because you infected this person and this person infected this person, and 5 infections later it got to someone's grandma and they died. It's hard to prove that, but we know that happens on a community level. That's a fact. It's not just some scientific theory now. We see that. I mean, in the United States, 150,000 people died. It's a lot of people, and a lot of that has to do, again, with the leadership, but a lot of that has to do just with the fact that people don't want to wear masks for some reason, and that's ridiculous. So, I mean, there are certain now that we know more about how the infection spreads, I think it's easier to get through these restrictions on quarantine. We know that if you're outside, if you're spread out from each other, then there's much less risk of spreading it. So if, obviously you're tired of sitting at home and there are beaches that are open nearby or parks, it's fine to go there with the people you live with, as long as you're, like relatively far away from other people, and that's okay. There's nothing crazy about that. But you don't need to go to nightclubs and concerts that are indoors right now, or host weddings. That's not something that is worthwhile. And given what I said about vaccines, there's a pretty realistic chance that at least one of them will be shown to be effective and will have a vaccine that is ready to go by the end of the year. I think now we know that that's not a crazy expectation. There's a real chance of that happening. So this is not something that we hope this is not something that will last for years. We think that this will probably start to get addressed at a very real level early next year with vaccines and treatments. So as long as we stay focused on controlling the infections as much as you can in your local community, I think we can come out of it better on the other side. So I think that's what I would have to say.